Start our recording. Excellent. Okay. Uh, so for those of you who are doing lab on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'll jump into we'll go through like the syllabus and Canvas and kind of the breakdown and stuff like that in lab just before we go over to the lab tomorrow. For right now, for lecture, we're just going to jump right here into chapter 1 and just work through this. So you guys know I do record these sections, and after lecture is done, uh, I have to compile the recording, and then I'll send it out to you. So usually the recording for lecture isn't going to come out until the next day because it takes it about an hour or so to compile and switch over, and then I have to email it out to you guys, and that takes another about hour and a half, depending on how long the video is and stuff. So just be aware of that. Be on the lookout for them. Usually the next day. Okay, so this chapter 1. Where else would we start? But with like the history, basically, of surgical technology, how it kind of came into being, and that's mostly what this chapter goes over. So let's just jump right into it. All right, this is kind of how we came into being as far as surgical technologists are concerned. Um, it's considered an allied health profession, meaning that you're not a doctor or a nurse. You don't have to go get licensed, uh, but we are a very necessary piece, especially to the operating room, but to the hospital as itself. Right? You have other technical positions within the hospital, like X-ray tech, lab tech. Um, uh, there's another one that's blanking on me right now, like transport techs, things like that. These are kind of like the ancillary help around in the hospital to help move patients from one place to another, things like that. All the little things um, that I guess a doctor would see that they're too high up to be concerning themselves with those little mundane activities, right? But also remember that none of that can happen without each piece, right? We can't do surgery with just the surgeon or just an anesthesiologist or just a nurse or just a tech. We need the whole team. So keep that in mind. That comes into the next chapter, chapter 2, when we start talking about teamwork and the roles of everybody. But nothing ever happens without the whole team present. Some of the history, right? Before World War II, a nurse was the surgical assistant. They were the person who scrubbed, who prepared all the instruments, did everything that we do. But they would also work in that kind of circulator role too. They'd have to do all the non-sterile stuff and then scrub in, set up all their stuff, and then maybe break scrub and help anesthesiologist, put the patient off to sleep and get him positioned, scrub back in to help do the procedure, and then break scrub, help wake them up and transfer them over to their bed and out and stuff like that. It became a lot for the nurses. Also, it became very expensive for the hospital to pay nurses. So they started to look for, uh, a different like role or a different set of people who could come in and do that same role that could kind of free the nurses up to do things that were deemed a little more important on their side, right? Doing like paperwork and ensuring patient safeties and things like that. Um, but like I said, it was the nurses who mainly did everything before World War II. They were assisting, they were doing stuff with anesthesia, they were doing SPD and setting up back tables, all that kind of stuff. Um, but then they just needed someone else to kind of free up those nurses. And it was after World War II that they noticed this need. Right? They noticed the need for more people in the OR. Uh, a group of people that were specialized in working with the instrumentation and setting up the field and helping the doctors, leaving the nurses to be more specialized in taking care of the patient, things like that. Plus, there was a nursing shortage, right? Not as many people were going into nursing, and a lot of the nurses that they did have and they had over in the field during World War II, some of them died and things like that. So there was a real shortage of nurses. So we needed another group of people. The way that they turned to, or the people they turned to, were the corpsmen in the army, and so they just transitioned them into being a surgical tech and trained them to help with surgery, giving the nurse their opportunity to do the things that they needed to do. Um, and the fact that you only had, maybe a handful of nurses, you couldn't have each one of them scrubbed into a procedure, and then there still needed to be patients taken care of. So it kind of freed all of that up and brought kind of the birth of surgical technology. Well, then that leads us into the Korean War, where we still have a shortage of nurses. The nurses were scrubbing because they were already more trained in like the instrumentation, the anatomy, things like that. And then the corpsmen were the ones who circulated. Well, then they started to see that there were certain paperworks and legal issues that they needed a licensed person to be the unsterile person. So that's how it switched, and the nurses became circulators, and the corpsmen turned into the scrubs. And they developed the Association of Operating Room Technicians, or AORT. Later gets changed. You're going to see it here in a few slides later. That acronym gets changed, and then they started formal trainings, right? Started developing the programs that we have now, and thinking about, okay, what's important? What do we need to start teaching these people so that when they're up there helping on the field, they can be of actual help, right? They can be more of a help, and that's where like your anatomy came in, and a lot of collaboration was taken with, they talked to surgeons, they talked to nurses, they talked to people who had that experience and had been up at the field, and asked them what they felt was important, and then they just began to build these surgical tech programs. Um, and you can see that it was war driven, right? It was a nursing shortage because of war. So where do you think the first surgical techs into being? Say, yeah, Courtney.
I'm assuming like not necessarily on the front line, but like right back where like the field surgeons would be.
Yeah, yeah. Military trained techs is where we got our first techs. We're military trained. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't know if anyone in this class is old enough. Uh, this is during the course of our time together, you're going to see that I make fun of myself quite often. Uh, One of the things that I make fun of myself about is my age. I'm a little bit older, if you can't tell, all the gray in my beard. Um, a lot of this comes from my son. Uh, but does anyone remember the TV show MASH? Ooh, yeah, it's a tough one. Uh, it was a show in the 70s. Thank you, Courtney. It was a great show, um, but it was set during the Korean War, and it was this mobile like hospital unit, and they did all their surgeries like in a tent and things like that, and that showed you back then it was the nurses who scrubbed. They had like um, Major Houlihan, aka Hot Lips Houlihan. She was one of the nurses, and she was one of the scrubs. And then you had like Hawkeye Pierce. He was one of the surgeons, um, and a couple other guys. But it showed you kind of like that environment. and where the beginnings kind of surgical technology started. Then in 1968, that's when the Association of Operating Room Technicians gets created. The AORN, which is still in existence today, the Association of Operating Room Nurses, were the ones who created the AORT. The AORT later changes its name to the Association of Surgical Technologists, or AST. I think in the early 70s. I think we talk about that in the next slide. But this was kind of a group of people that came together and created this association so that people training to become surgical techs can get certification through, like a specialized test, which is what you guys are going to be doing on April. Looking at your thing right now. April 1st, on April Fool's Day next year, you guys will be taking your certification exam. Oh, April Fool's Day, huh? We must have planned that out just right. And then they have a joint review committee on the education. And that's what they first started back in 1968. Now, some of the names of these things have changed. Like this joint review committee is now the KHEP people. They're the people who set the standards for how surgical technology programs are supposed to be laid out across the country, so that everyone is getting that same information. They're supposed to be getting the same types of training, and so it's kind of universal across the board. So you can get your training in New York and work in Hawaii. Right? It should be all relatively the same. And then in 1970, they had the first certifying exam. And then in 1973, AORT became AST. And then a certified tech is now a certified surgical technologist, or an CST. So that was a little back history of how surgical technology came into being, right? What the reasoning behind having us exist in the first place is. Sorry, it always seems like nobody texts me throughout the whole morning, and then as soon as I get into lecture, no matter what time lecture is, that's when my phone has to decide it wants to blow up. So the AST is the main organization for surgical technologists. Once you've graduated your program, whether or not you're certified or not, you can be a member of AST. Here in the state of Florida, the majority of the hospitals you go to are going to require some kind of certification. But there are places all across the country that don't require a certification for you to work. Nevada, California, I know that you don't have to have a certification to get a job as a surgical technologist. However, in both of those states, if you are certified, you get paid a little more. I think in like Nevada, or at least in Reno, it was like $1 more an hour. So that roughly translates into a little over $2,000 more a year just to be certified. But they set the code of ethics for surgical technologists, your standards of practice, and your basic job description. Right now, the job description can kind of tweak a little bit depending on the hospital you work at or whatever. But your main things, as far as adhering to aseptic technique and handling and passing of instrumentation, things like that, are going to be true across the board. So some of the affiliate organizations is the ARC / STSA, or otherwise known as the Well, I guess that's a little bit later. This is the council that checks out surgical tech programs. So these are the people that actually come to the campus and they look through all your paperwork and all of your lesson plans and your graduation percentage rates and your CST, your certification test pass percentage rates, and all of that stuff. And as a program, we have to adhere to certain standards. And if we're not adhering to those standards, when they come out and review our program, uh, they report to the CAHEP people or the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs. And ARC will tell CAHEP of all of the findings that they have. And then CAHEP makes the decision on whether our program is going to get accredited or not. And accreditation basically is, hey, we've gone and checked over that program. They're doing good work there. We're going to give them our seal of approval for training techs. If you don't get that accreditation, you can still kind of train people, but it becomes you don't get looked at as well. You're like, well, you're not really accredited. So something in your program is a little funny. Are your techs, are your graduates going to be top notch? Or do they know what they're supposed to know? So that's the kind of the thing there. So ARC, they're the people who actually come to your campus and look over your stuff. CAHEP is just a committee in a building in another state that listens to what ARC tells them. And then they decide on whether or not to actually give the accreditation or not. Does that make sense for you guys? Good, yeah, because that's the difference between these two. They actually look over your paperwork. They're the one that actually grants accreditation. A couple other organizations. The ABHES, right? This is the Accrediting Bureau of Health Education Schools. They're kind of over CAHEP. They're just kind of an oversee, and they make all the policies and the recommendations and the standards and things like that kind of filter down to CAHEP. They're kind of like if you want to think about it in terms of federal, state, and local. Federal is this bureau, kind of like the Federal Bureau of Investigations, right? And then your state level would be CAHEP, and in your local level is ARC. And then finally, there's the NBSTSA. This is the National Board of Surgical Technology and Surgical Assisting. This is the people that do your certification. They're the ones who write the certification test and administer the certification test. And then they keep all the records of who's certified and who's not. AST does all the continuing education to help keep you certified because you have to do 30 hours of CEUs every 2 years to maintain your certification. If your certification ever lapses, you don't do all those 30 CEUs and your certification expires, you have to take the test again to get your certification back. And the test, I think, costs $400 just to take the test. So, there's technical certificate programs or vocational. You can do an LVN, be a licensed vocational nurse and scrub. But then all you have is a certificate. Certificate is not the same thing as certification. So basically what you have is your graduation diploma from surgical technology, right? Then you can move on to having a 2 year degree or an associate's degree. That's what you get here when you graduate from Concord. You have an associate's degree in surgical technology. And then if you pass the certification test, then you are also certified in surgical technology. Um, a 4 year degree, there is currently not a 4 year degree for surgical technology. There is not a bachelor's degree for surgical tech. Um, they are working on one though. Usually, though, with a 4 year degree comes licensure as well, which means a little bit harder test, but you would make more money because now you have a license rather than a certification. License is seen as better than a certification. And then, of course, you can get trained in military programs as well, like the way I went. Right now, the 2 year degree is the best because not only do you have the degree, but you have the certification as well, and you've shown that you've been through more schooling, you've done more time. Now, as far as these like certificate programs, uh, with surgical technology, all the requirements are still the same. Like you still have to have the same number of cases in externship. You still have to have, passing with a 75 or better. All of that is still the same. The difference is they don't take any gen ed classes. So this certificate program is usually maybe 12 months long, but a lot of programs are now moving to this 2 year degree because it always looks better. Students can get hired straight out of school faster because now you have a degree. Everything looks much better on paper. Certification, right? NBS TSA, they're the ones, like we said, runs the certification exams and keeps all that information. But you have to meet certain eligibility requirements. We get into real detail with this when you're going out to externship because you got to know, how many cases you need in each service and things like that, and how many cases you need total. You also have to graduate from a accredited program such as ours. Uh, but then once you pass that test, you'll be considered a CST, right? A certified surgical technologist. That's what you get from the NBS TSA. So these are the letters you get to put behind your name whenever you write your name out now. Now, if you test through a different testing agency, because the NBS TSA is not the only certifying body. The National Center for Competency Testing, or the NCCT, is another place that you could go to get tested. The problem with them is they're not as nationally recognized. You still get certified. You are still taking a surgical technology certifying exam. It's just not as many hospitals know of the NCCT, and the way that your don't have drawing capability. Uh, so instead of the letters behind your name saying CST, it says TS-C. And what it stands for is Tech in Surgery Certified. When people see that, because most people are used to seeing the CST, when they see the TS-C, they're like, what's that? Then you have to do some explaining, and they're like, oh, it seems a little weird that you didn't test through this normal channel that most other people do. And since they don't know much about this test, they tend to think of it as maybe an easier test, or you're not technically certified kind of thing, even though you really are. And then, sorry, then you have your continuing education credits after you become certified to maintain that certification. So here's some of your eligibility, right, that we talked about. You got to graduate from an accredited program. You can either have currently be a CST or previously have been one, or because you graduated from a program, now you're taking that test the first time. Right? Graduate from a military program or been certified and had like that lapse, right? Uh, and then if you are taking the test uh, before you technically graduate, then the results of that test get held until you give them some kind of proof of graduation. Um, I haven't really seen a scenario where that's going to play out like that, uh, because, like, especially here for us, you take the test on your last day, and on your very last day in the program, all of your other grades have been put in, and you've already technically graduated. So, and then we typically get the results. You're going to take a test on the last day, your Friday. So then we usually get the results the following Monday or Tuesday, and then let you guys know, because we get those results first. If you guys were going to wait until the NBS TSA gave you your results, it would probably take like maybe 2 to 3 weeks before they sent you something in the mail. But they send it here to the program, and then we call you guys and let you know what your results were. The NCCT, like I was saying, they have their own exam, but they also have their own eligibility requirements and things like that too. So they require, like NBS TSA, they require a minimum of 120 cases. NCCT wants 150. So different rules, that kind of thing. But for you guys, we use NBS TSA. We only use the NCCT one time. It was right around the time that I first got here. Was the first class that had to go take their test. We were transitioning at that time from just a certificate program to a associate's degree program, and the the certificate program. What had happened? What we should have been able to do was just transition from one to the next without having to lose our accreditation. But the program director that was here before Ortiz, she didn't know about you being able to transition like that. So she let the accreditation lapse and thought we had to get a whole brand new accreditation for the degree program. So we actually had to go through the whole ARC KHEP process and everything. So I got to see all of that and understand it. But we use the NBS TSA because it's more nationally recognized, and because we don't have to have as many cases and things like that. And then you guys can also get your certification upon graduation. With the NCCT, you don't get your full certification until after you've graduated, you've been hired by a facility, and you complete another 30 general surgery cases, and then send that into them, and then they give you your full certification. But with that first class, we actually had to test them through the NCCT because AST wouldn't take them to test because they didn't graduate from an accredited program because we were in the process of becoming accredited. So yeah, it was a lot of catch 22 in there where, well, in order for you to do this, you have had to done this first. But in order for you to do this first, you had to do this other thing. And it was like, wait, but I couldn't do the other thing until I did this first. So it was weird. It was really weird. And I'm glad that we don't have to do this anymore. For your continuing education, uh, so you go through AST to actually do your continuing education courses. And then AST will take all that information and submit it to NBSTSA for you. Just as long as you've met the 30 hours and everything's good, then it'll automatically renew your certification. I just got done doing all my CEUs and everything back in January. So, because my certification is expires in June. So, and the way that AST works is that you have to have all your credits and everything turned into them at least 3 months in advance because they have to go through and make sure, that all your stuff counts before they submit it to NBSTSA, and then NBSTSA will say, "Oh, okay, good," and then go ahead and update their system to renew your certification. But it usually takes them some time, so you don't have all the way up until that last day to turn that stuff in. You have to get it turned in early so they have an opportunity to go through it before your certification expires. If you are working at a place that does require certification, if your certification expires, you won't be able to clock in for work. It'll lock you out of the actual time clock until you get your certification taken care of and updated. And if you can't clock in, you can't work. So you're basically, it's like free days off, but you're not getting paid. So some facilities also have a clinical ladder program. Right? So when you first graduate and you get on the job, you're a level 1 CST. Right? You're going through all your trainings and orientations and stuff like that, and proving to the facility that you know what you're doing. And you're learning your doctors and learning your procedures and things like that. But then you can move up and become a level 2, usually after a year worth of employment, right? You're taking call, things like that. You may have to do some other things. You may have to do like some in-services and show people how to work a particular product or something like that. And then that's when you're in level 2, or you're considered kind of proficient, right? You're working on your own. You no longer have a preceptor, things like that. And then you move to level 3, expert. Usually you become kind of an expert around year 3 to 5, because that's how much repetition and exposure to different kinds of cases and different services. Where when you first come out of you're an entry level, you may be doing a lot of general surgery cases, right? And then as you move into your proficiency and things like that, and they want you to start taking call, now you're doing ortho and vascular and brain surgeries and things that you may have to get called in for in the middle of the night for an emergency. But then as you do more and more cases, and you've been in the OR for a number of years and everything like that, you're going to start to see a lot of similarities and patterns between different services and things like that, and you'll become a lot more comfortable. And that's when you kind of move into that expert role, and they may give you more leadership roles. You may be in charge of a service, like in orthopedics, and to be in charge of a service means you're the one who's like ordering supplies and ordering for replacement of instrumentation or ordering new instrumentation, you're in on the, with the new doctors when they show up, so you can learn their routines and the things that they like and things, try to get some of that stuff into supply for them, um, that kind of thing. So uh, as you move up in level, you move up in responsibility as well. Now, usually with these clinical ladders also comes a bump in pay, right? If you're a level one, entry level, just out of graduation student, or not student, new hire, you wouldn't be expected to make as much as somebody, say, who had been there for 30 years, right? You got to get that experience and come up. And this is a way that they can help get you that experience and kind of move you up and get you those pays a little bit quicker. Because like level 2 and level 3 are only going to come as fast as you learn the stuff, right? And a lot of the level 2 and 3 are going to be dependent on you, the individual, and how much of a go-getter are you to moving up in these levels and taking on that extra responsibility. Our role as the tech, right? Number one, we're establishing and preparing sterile fields, right? Also, in that same, we're also protecting and maintaining those sterile fields. We're keeping anyone who's not sterile scrubbed in with their gown and gloves on and things like that, or items that are not sterile, like equipment in the room, patient belongings, things like that, are not coming in contact or not even coming anywhere near our sterile field. We're acting as kind of a shield for all of that. Along those lines, if you happen to, like, if somebody balls up like a piece of paper and they're trying to throw it into the trash can that's across the room, but when they throw it, it's kind of sails off and you see it coming for your sterile field and you're scrubbed in, your job is to smack that thing that is coming near your table away. Is that going to contaminate you? Yes. But I would rather be contaminated than my table. It's going to take a lot less for me to become sterile again than it will for me to make that table sterile again. And then, of course, we pass instrumentation, meds, equipment, and things during surgery. But one of our most important roles, and you may get this asked to you by Ortiz, but you will definitely get this asked to you on a test somewhere, whether it be a quiz in this class or on your CST exam, something like that. The most important role that a surgical tech has is the handling and care of specimen. If we lose a specimen or we mislabel a specimen or something like that, it's going to cause complication for the patient. It'll lead either to a misdiagnosis or, if we lose the specimen altogether, then they don't have a diagnosis at all. And the patient has to come back and have surgery again to get more tissue. So the most important role of the surgical technologist is the handling and care of specimens. But we can also act in an assistant circulator type role where we're helping the nurse. Maybe the nurse is busy with anesthesia, working with blood that needs to be given to the patient, or they have paperwork stuff that they're doing, or there's like trauma going on, and they can't attend to the needs of those in the field, right up at the sterile field. So we can help as a tech and run around and do those circulator duties. The things that we can't do in terms of as a circulator is we can't do anything. We don't have anything to do with the paperwork because legally we're not able to like sign off on anything and stuff like that. So, but pretty much anything else that's a circulator duty, we can do as well. We can open things to the sterile field. We can prep the patient. We can help position the patient. We can put in a urinary catheter. We can do all those kinds of things. I'm sorry, hang on just 1 second. Mr. Ortiz is calling me. He said he didn't care that he interrupted your lecture. I'm kidding. He didn't really say that. He didn't really say that. He just laughed. But we can do just about anything else that the circulator does other than administer any medication or anything that has to do with the paperwork. But we can, plug the Bovie in. We can hook the suction up. We can put a grounding pad on. We can help anesthesia intubate the patient. Uh, all those kinds of things. Anything that kind of helps, just kind of helps. Right? There can also be a first assist and a second assist. A first assist, they're up there helping the surgeon with the surgery. They can suction, they can place retractors, they can suture, all those kinds of things. Second assist can do all those same things as a first assist, but they may just be, if you need a second assist in there, it's just because you need an extra pair of hands. And most often, a second assist is just going to be holding retractors. Now, there are plenty of surgical cases where there's no first assist and there's no second assist. There's the surgeon and the surgical tech. So you're doing kind of both roles. You're acting as the surgical tech, passing instrumentation and that kind of stuff, but you could also be holding a retractor with one hand. You might also be, suctioning, helping, with hemostasis and Boving and things like that. It's all in the effort, to get that patient off the table as fast as possible. The longer that they're under anesthesia, the worse it is for the patient. So we always try to do things quickly, efficiently. Yes. This emergency duty, this is being on call. And you do get paid to be on call. It depends on the facility you work for. Some places pay you $3 an hour to be on call. Others pay you anywhere up to $5 an hour just to be on call. And that's you sitting at home waiting by your phone for them to call you with some kind of emergency to come in. Does that mean that you can't go anywhere, that you're stuck at your house? No, you can go. You can kind of roam around the city kind of thing. You have to be within 30 minutes. It's pretty standard with ORs everywhere. You have a 30-minute response time from the time that they call you to the time that you're, at the hospital and changed into scrubs and in the operating room. That being said, I mean, there's been times that I've been in the middle of grocery shopping, and I basically have to take the cart to the front and say, "I'm sorry, I've been, called into work. I work at the hospital. I have to leave now, and I don't have time to put all this stuff back." And it kind of falls onto the grocery store to take care of that for you. But they understand. They're mostly cool with it. At least to my face, they were okay with it. I'm sure as soon as I walked out, they were like, "This really lazy." Right. Instrumentation. Excuse me. Instrumentation specialist. You work in SPD. You're putting instrument trays back together. Patient care, right? You can be like basically a babysitter. Right? A patient needs somebody to sit with them, or you can be a transport person. You taking them, back to their room up on the floor, or bringing them down to pre-op, or taking them to X-ray, things like that. Um, there's leadership and management. The leadership I kind of spoke to before, where you're in charge of a service. As far as surgical technology goes, I've seen some uh, people who are managers, if you will, uh, but it's not really a place, or it's not really a career field uh, that there's opportunity to be a manager as a surgical tech. A lot of the management positions in the operating room are reserved for the nurses. Because the nurses are licensed. Most of them, some of them have a 4-year degree, things like that. They reserve those management positions for nurses. It's not to say that tech can't be a manager. It's just rare, very rare to see it that way. If you're wanting that management kind of pathway and things like that, it's better to work in SPD, and then now you can work your way into a management position that way and become like the manager of the central processing and things like that. So, but then also once you get comfortable in your job and you're like a level 2 proficient surgical tech, you may also become a preceptor, and now you're teaching new staff when they come in, or you're there with a student and teaching that student and showing them what you learned and remembering back what it was like to be a student, and how nervous and unaware of certain things that you were, and you may be able to kind of like help that next generation of techs along, right? Show them the little pitfalls and the shortcuts and things like that. It's kind of the reason I became a teacher. Um, but here's all the kind of different career field or career opportunities for a certified surgical tech, right? You could be facility based, which means you work at a hospital, right? You could be in the military. You could either work at a hospital, or you could get deployed and work at an air transportable hospital, or an ATH. It's basically an upgrade from MASH. Back in MASH, they were all tents. Now they've created these kind of like modular units that kind of fold on themselves and things like that. They're a little more sturdy. You take that out to the field, and then you unbox those and kind of like set them up, kind of like almost like Legos or Lincoln Logs. Ooh, Lincoln Logs, that really did age me right there. Um, but then you just kind of put them all together, and then that builds you like a whole kind of like hospital just out in the middle of nowhere. You can go into specialty practices like plastics and things like that, and you can work actually in the doctor's office, or you can even become a private scrub for a surgeon, where they take you to every facility that they go to, and you scrub their cases, and then the staff there is the one that does all the cleanup for you. That's kind of nice. You can also go back and become a first assist. That's more schooling, and then you have to do more cases in that first assist role. You have to have a surgeon that will mentor you and kind of be uh, your person who says that yes, you did do all this stuff, and yes, you are good. They evaluate you and things like that. You can be an educator or a clinical instructor like myself, Mr. Ortiz, Ms. Kimbleton. Typically, you want about 2 years experience before moving into an educator type role, so that you've seen a nice variety of cases, and you're getting that understanding of the patterns and how things work in the OR. You can be a medical rep, specifically for the OR. These are the guys who are going to come in and kind of they kind of walk the surgeon through the procedure and then troubleshoot for them any questions and things they have about their implants and things that they're putting in. Most of the ones you're going to see out there in the OR will be orthopedic reps for like total joints. You'll see them for every total joint case. They're always there for those cases. Um, and then like on spine surgery, when they're putting screws and rods and stuff into somebody's back. There'll be a rep for those kind of cases. Pacemaker implants, things like that. You'll see these medical reps there to answer any questions and to help these surgeons along with anything that they may have an issue with or problem or a little technique question, something like that. Those reps are there for those things. And also, they're there to help the nurse fill out like any kind of like specialty paperwork and, things like that with because we have to track any implant that we put into a patient. They come with like lot numbers and all that kind of stuff in case something ever comes back from the manufacturer of those items. Like, oh, dang, hey, the ones that were all this lot number, we found out that we didn't use this kind of metal or something in it. We use a different kind of metal that can be more prone to like infections or breakdown or something like that. So we're recalling all of those. And as the facilities, you go back through all the records that you have. And if there's somebody who had something put in from that lot number that needs to come out, now we need to get in contact with that person, schedule them to come in to have surgery, to have that removed and replaced with something else. So a lot of it's for tracking. Like I said, central processing management, if you want to go that management route, that's your best option is working down in SPD. You can do like research for products and development. They used a lot of surgical techs when they were developing the robot. They got surgical tech perspective on it because we're the ones on the field, draping it out and changing out the instrumentation and things like that. So we had some input as far as, let's make it easy for us too to switch things in and out. So that helps with that efficiency piece. Trying to think of some other career opportunities with surgical technology that aren't really listed here. Nothing else I can really think of at the moment. But this could just be a stepping stone for some. Right? Hey, I'm a surgical tech. Now I want to move on to being a nurse or a surgeon or an anesthesiologist or something like that. This could just be that first step of many. We had some people who just graduated when they first started the program, talked about moving on to being a doctor, being, and they just wanted this as a way to get into the medical field and see what it was all about. There's that FA, right? And then the educator, we already talked about those. I don't even know why that slide's in there. I should probably just delete that. Bye. But then there's our last slide. That'll always be our last slide. So does anybody have any questions about kind of the history and kind of setup here of the surgical technologist? Does anybody have any questions in general? Anything you want some more information on? Anything that you maybe what to expect in lab coming tomorrow or in the future? Does anyone want Mr. Ortiz's home address for later reference so that they can go by and leave flaming bags of poo at his door or anything like that? Oh, I should caveat all of that with never tell Mr. Ortiz anything that I make fun of him in here, please. Yes, Courtney, me and poo. I find poo to be the ultimate revenge. Yes, we are using a book for this class. It is, hang on, let me grab it out of my bag. So the big surgical technologist book by Fuller. So this is the book we're going to use for lecture. Okay, and there should be a workbook that you guys got that went with this. That workbook is where your assignments are going to come out of. You'll see it In Canvas, as you click on each assignment, it'll have the directions there for you. I'll go over more of this with those who are going to be in lab tomorrow. We're going to do a whole Canvas piece. But as you click on the assignment, it'll come up in the directions that'll tell you like complete chapter 8 in your Fuller workbook. And then so when you bring out the workbook, you go to the pages for chapter 8, and then you just couple that with chapter 8 of your book. And you should be able to find the answers for those workbook pages right there in the book. It should be pretty much word for word. I don't think Ortiz sent out any lab schedules. Let's see. I know I sent out an email to each of you late last week. I think it was Friday last week, maybe even Thursday. That told you like when the times for lecture and lab were, and I broke them down into the groups. So you should know like if you're in group A, B, or C for lab. I sent all those to your school email, your Concord email. You shouldn't need to bring your books or your workbooks to lab with you. Oh, there it is. Yep. In the chat is the breakdown of times and the different groups for lab. The times for lecture are Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 1 to 2:30. Fridays, we understand since it was a last minute thing that it had to do because of the way that the scheduling and everything worked. Ortiz had to make it for that Friday. Every lecture session will be recorded and they will be sent out to you guys in email. So on Fridays, understandably, if you can't make it because of work and things like that, just know that video will be there for you to reference back later. In Canvas, I did add the PowerPoints for each lecture that we're going to be doing. It should be right below each lecture. And it is the actual PowerPoint that I am actually using and showing you guys. So it should be the same. Yes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1 to 2:30. The only time that it'll be held against you if you can't attend live lecture will be Mondays and Wednesdays. That's when I'll take the attendance for, but on Fridays, it's a little more flexible for Friday. Mondays is when we're going to be doing our quizzes. So you definitely have to be there on Mondays for the quiz. Quizzes are that day only, unless you've gotten with me prior and there's some extenuating circumstance that you're going to be out of town, a death in the family, you're in the hospital, things like that. And then we can arrange for you to take the quiz early or when you come back or whatever. But remember, you got to make sure that you arrange that with me, because if you are not present for the quiz, there's nothing I can do about it, and that's a 0 on the quiz. All your assignments have due dates to them, and then they will lock out 3 days after the due date. That is the latest I can accept late work for any assignment is 3 days past its due date. Anything past that, and it becomes a 0. Quizzes will be online. The only test you will take here on campus is your final. Every 10 weeks, your final, that last Friday, will be here on campus. So make sure you set up to be off that day from work if you're working or anything like that. For this term, it is May 28th. Friday, May 28th is when you'll be taking your final, and that'll be scheduled at 8 a.m. 8 a.m. But then once you're done with the final, you're free to take off. We will also have finals in lab. So if you're Monday, Wednesday, your final will always be that Wednesday, your last Wednesday in lab. If you're Tuesday, Thursday, your final will be on that Thursday. Let's make sure I'm not missing any questions here. As far as the turning in your assignments for lecture or lab, it'll all be done online. So you can either take a picture and upload your picture of your assignment, or you can scan it like PDF, or you can even do your assignment in Word and type it all out that way if you want to, and then submit the Word document too. Before first lab, if you want to just look over like your basic OR attire, there actually is um, a YouTube video out there. If you search in YouTube for Logan's Lab, there's a video out there on surgical attire and like all your PPE and stuff like that. It actually is me in our lab. Strange. I'm a YouTube star. I did not monetize the channel, so I don't make any money off of you guys watching the video. That's a conflict of interest. Could do that. Let's see. Does anybody have any other questions? Comments? Concerns? Amy's name from now on is Joyce. Forever. I'm going to call you Joyce in lab just to confuse Ortiz. And then he'll call you Joyce at graduation. It'll be a running joke. It'll be so funny. So funny. All right. If nobody has any other questions or comments, concerns, nothing? All right, we'll go ahead and end. Typically, we'll try to do a chapter a day. Certain chapters, like chapter 8, is going to take a few days of lecture because it's kind of a big chapter and there's a lot of concepts to it. But here early on, it'll generally be about a chapter a day. All right, Group B, I'll see you bright and early in the morning for lab, right? 8 a.m. And then Group C, we'll see you in the afternoon tomorrow. And Group A, we won't see you again until Wednesday. Have a beautiful day. If anyone who's watched American Dad at the end. Mr. Logan is very funny in his own mind. I appreciate when people laugh at my stupid jokes. Thank you very much. All right, you guys have a good rest of your day. See y'all tomorrow, most of you tomorrow.